Hi guys, and welcome to lesson 7 of writing hundredths. Like always, we're going to be starting with our in focus task. So let me just get my pen ready so we can begin. So over here we've got Ruby, and Ruby says I use 124 0.01 counters to show a number. Now let's remind ourselves, what does that 0.01 counter represent? Any ideas? Brilliant. Well, hopefully you'll be able to remember that those are hundredths counters. So Ruby has used 124 hundredths counter to show a number. Now, what number is Ruby showing? Any ideas? Now, some of you, if you're looking at the actual clue that Ruby said, we know that she's got 124 hundredths. Now that can be seen in this array here of discs. Now it would be taking a long time for you to count them individually one by one, but you might think, okay guys, well look, the top row we know we've got 10 counters, and so we've got one row of 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rows of 10 there, and then we've got these 2 and then 4. So we can see that the number is 124 hundredths. Now, how would we write that number as a fraction? Any ideas? Well, hopefully, I'm thinking that you would have been able to think in your mind, right, well, we know we've got 124 hundredths. However, my question to you is, can Ruby use fewer discs to show this same number? Let's watch on the next slide to see if we can help her out. Now, in the last slide, when Ruby was working out her problem, we were then asked if we could show the same number, so 124 hundredths, using fewer discs. So some of Ruby's classmates have decided to try and help her. So you can see up here, we've got another girl. This is Lola. Now, Lola decides that she's going to use tenths and hundredths counters. So she decides that she's going to play around with Ruby's disc and see if she can make the same number using fewer counters. Well, as you can probably see here, Lola has decided that she's going to be regrouping. Now, we've been working a lot on regrouping, and we know that for every 10 hundredths counters, that will give us one of the tenths counters. So you can see here, we started off with, in fact, 12 rows of the hundredths counters. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sorry, it's taking a while guys, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 rows of those hundredths counters, and then Lola's decided to regroup those and make them into tenths counters. Oh, and we can't forget these little guys down here, the remaining hundredths counters. So Lola has worked out that in fact 124 hundredths is also the same as 12 tenths and then 4 hundredths. Now, how can we write this as a decimal? You might have noticed down here that we have gotten a little reminder from Lola of how to write it, of course, as a fraction, but we need to think about how we could write this as a decimal. Any ideas? Let's explore this a bit more. We can come back to that. Okay, so I'm going to be introducing you to another classmate. I'd like for you to look at the top and meet Connor. Now, Connor's going to see if he can show the same number, 124 hundredths, using fewer discs. But the discs that he's going to be using to try and work this out are ones discs and also hundredths discs. So first of all, he looks at Ruby's original group of discs, or counters, shall we say, and he then decides to regroup. Now, he knows that in fact, if you have 100 hundredths counters, then that is also equal to 1, 1. So let me just write that as a fraction, just like we've been doing previously just before we went to decimal. So we know that 100 hundredths is also going to give us 1, 1. He then has got a few little more things to do. So instead of having all of these hundreds counters, he then decides to say, okay, well, there we go. I've now got one ones counter. Now he can't forget the rest of the hundreds counters. And you can see here that he's got one row of 10 hundredths, another row of 10 hundredths, and then 4 more. So we can see that he's got now 24 hundredths left. So Connor has been able to show that 124 hundredths is also the same as 1 and 24 hundredths. And he shows that he can write that as a decimal as 1.24. Now remember, with your decimals, you have to be really careful with the placement of your digits, and also just think about the invisible place value chart. So I've just drawn it on there for you. Right, let's move on and see what else we can discover. Connor had just shown us that he was able to make 124 hundredths out of ones and hundredths counters. He was also able to show us how to write that as a decimal. So you can have a look up here in this bubble to remind us. So we would read 1.24 as 1 and 24 hundredths. Now you've also been having practice at writing those decimals into fractions as well. So we would also write 1.24 or 1 and 24 hundredths as the fraction 1 and 24 hundredths here. Now my question to you is, I want you to have a look down here on this number line. So where should we place 1.24 on the number line? Now the first thing to always ask yourself, is it more or less than 1? So let's have a look at the number line, and let's have a look at the decimal that we're dealing with. So we know that it is more than 1 because we've got these other digits here to deal with. So we will always know that it's going to have to be placed somewhere on this side of the 1 on the number line. Now, what are the increments that have been marked on the scale? Basically, it's asking all these little lines, what do they represent? What are their values? So let's have a think. We've got 0, we've got 0.5, we've got 1, 1.5 and 2. But there's got to be other numbers in between. Now, if you look very carefully, I know it's a bit blurry, but for example, we're starting off at 0 and all these increments are representing hundredths. So we know that if we have 10 hundredths, it's also the same as 1/10. So let's see if we can fill in the number line a little bit more. If I start at 0 and I'm counting all that, it's going to then be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and we've already got 0.5. I am sorry, this pen is not easy to do because it's with my actual mouse pad. So you can see that we've filled this number line out. Why don't you have a go at looking and trying to fill it out yourself? I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay, now luckily Maths No Problem has kind of helped us here, and they've already been able to show that once we get past 1, we know that we're going to have 1.1, 1.2, and there we go. We've got to do 4 little hundredths along, and we know that we can place 1.24 on the number line here. So some of the lesson today is going to involve you looking carefully at number lines. So really make sure that you're filling it in and counting those increments carefully. Let's watch on. We have one more classmate who decides to give this a go. We have Simone up here. Now Simone decides that she's in fact going to use ones counters, tenths counters, and hundredths counters. So we already know that if we had 100 of the hundredths counters, that is also going to be the same as 1 of the ones counters, and Connor did help us out with that too. Now down here as well, we know that we've got altogether we're going to have 24 hundredths left, because remember we were working with 124 hundredths originally. That was Ruby's original bunch of counters, but Simone decides to break that down even more using smaller counters. So she knows that if she has 10 of these hundredths counters, that's also going to be the same as one of the tenths counters. So because she's got 20 of these hundredths counters, she now breaks it down into 2 of those tenths counters. And these last little guys down here, these 4 hundredths, they can't be broken up or regrouped anymore, so they're going to have to remain the same. So Simone has worked out that in fact 124 hundredths is also the same as 1 of the ones counters, 2 of the tenths counters, and 4 of the hundredths counters. I think you'd all agree with me that Simone was the one classmate who was able to show that same number, 124 hundredths, using the fewest discs or counters. So Simone, then we said, helped us find out that 124 hundredths is also the same as 1 of the ones counters, 2 of the tenths counters, and 4 of the hundredths counters. So what's the value of the digits in 1.24? I've got a nice little place value chart here, and I'm hoping we can fill that out so we can see how we're going to be working with this amount further. So the first question, what is the place value of the digit 1? So we're hoping that you'll be able to see that that represents 1 of the ones. What is the place value of the digit 2? We know that that is 2 tenths. And lastly, what is the place value of digit 4? We know that that is 4 hundredths. So altogether, 124 hundredths would be written as 1.24 as a decimal. So we're going to be moving on to guided practice like we always do. So have a look at question 1. It's asking you to write each number as a decimal, and you can use ones, tenths or hundredths counters to help. Now sadly, if we were in class, we'd be able to get all these wonderful counters out, we'd be able to put them in an array, we'd be able to regroup them, and although we can't do that, I am really sorry and gutted for that, but please, if you are stuck, go back to some of the previous slides of this lesson to try and help you. So you've got questions A, B, C and D, and remember you're going to have to write these numbers as a decimal. Now if you do need to draw out your counters, these ones out here, remember try and make those numbers, but if you're going to draw them, try and make them using the fewest amount of discs that you can. Think about how Simone did it in the previous slide. Right, in a moment I'd like for you to pause the video, I'd like for you to have a go, and then you can click onto the next slide to find the answers. Best of luck guys. Okay everybody, I'm hoping that went well for you, so let's have a go at looking at the answers and discussing them. So question A, you started off with 148 hundredths and you had to write that as a decimal. I'm hoping that you would have realised, okay, so that 1, we know that that's going to represent 100, and then we've also got 4, which is going to represent 40, and then we've got 8, which is going to represent 8. Now, if we were to put that all together, we know that if we have 100 of those hundredths, that's going to give us 1. And then we know that we've got 40 left over, so we've got 4 tenths left over, and we've got 8 of those little hundredths. So 148 hundredths would be the same as 1.48 as a decimal. Now, the same thing would be for question B. We start off with 213 hundredths. If we wanted to partition that, we know that we can get 200 there of the 1, and then we're moving on to the tenths. So we know that that 1 is actually 10, and then we've got 3. Now then, if we were to write that as a decimal, we know that 100 hundredths is also the same as 2 ones. And we've got our decimal point, and we know we've got 1 of the tenths, and then we've got the rest of the hundredths. So 213 hundredths is also the same as 2.13. Now sometimes if you have a look at questions C and D, it can be a little bit misleading because it's written as a fraction, but remember you have to look at the denominators, and it's basically the same as A and B. So we know that for question C we're starting off with 105 hundredths. Now this one is a bit tricky because the zeros can kind of muddle you up. Now hopefully you would have been able to see that if you've got, okay, I know that that one is representing 100, That 0, well, that means that there's no tenths, and then we've got obviously 5 of those hundredths. So if I put that here below, we know that 105 tenths is the same as 1. We've got 0 tens, and then we've got 5 hundredths. So that would be written as a decimal 1.05. Now, last but not least, I'm not going to talk it through the same way because hopefully it's clicked by now. 150 hundredths would be written as a decimal as 1.50. Now you have to make sure that you put that 0 at the end, should I say, because that is making sure that we know that there is no hundredths there. If we didn't have that hundredths, it wouldn't make sense in the same way. So I'm hoping that is looking a bit clearer for you. Let's move on to question 2 of guided practice on the next slide. Okay, so question 2 of guided practice is a little bit different, but we have explored this earlier on when we were looking at how Connor was working with the discs. So question 2 is asking, what is the decimal represented by each letter? So you can see here that you've got 3 different number lines. And you can see that on each of the number lines, there are 3 letters that you're going to have to be writing out as a decimal as what they represent. So I'm going to first of all help you with A, and then I'm going to ask you to pause the video and then continue on. So we can see here that we have got different increments on this number line. So we're starting at 0, but it's really important to look at what we've already been told, the information that the question is given. We have to make sure that we are remembering that this top number line is dealing with hundredths for first of all. So we know that the first increment is going to be 0.01 and then so on and so forth. I think the best thing for you to do, guys, is even redraw them out or write all the increments values on the actual number line to help you. So we've got 0.01, then it's going to be 0.02, 0.03, 0.04, 0.05, 0.06, 0.07, 0.08 and 0.09. Sorry. So now we've worked out that at A, the decimal represented here should be 0.09. Now I'd like for you now to pause the video and work out each of those letters on each of those number lines and then click on to the next slide to find the answers. Best of luck. Okay everybody, I'm hoping that you found that one okay. I know it was a bit trickier because the increments and trying to fill them in are pretty tough on the number line. So let's look at the first number line. We had worked out that at this point A, we knew that that was actually representing 0.09, and then you'd be counting on. So we've got 0.1 and then we'd have 0.11, 0.12, 0.13 and then B 0.14. 0.15, 0.16, and then at C 0.17, then 0.18, 0.19, and then 0.2. Now this second number line was a bit tricky, so I do appreciate that it might have been a bit tougher. Now we were told that this first increment was 0.02, and you would have had to have looked and seen how many more jumps would there have been till we get to 0.1. So instead of these increments going up in ones, they're actually been going up in twos. So if we start from 0.02, we would have gone to 0.04, 0.06, and then we'd reach P 0.08. Then we would have gotten all the way here to 0.1. So remembering that we're going to be having to move on from that. So we would know that we would be then reaching 0.12, 0.14, 0.16 at Q, 0.18 and then 0.2. Then continuing, we would have been getting at 0.22, 0.24, 0.26, 0.28, 0.3, and then finally our 0.32. Now, like I said, hopefully that kind of made sense. I know it's tricky. It would have been so much easier if we were together in class with number lines actually in front of us. But nonetheless, I'm sure you've done an amazing job. I'd like for you now to then head to your workbooks, and could you turn to page 14 and 15 and complete worksheet 7 for the day. Best of luck. Don't forget the date, and if you're stuck at any point, come back to this video and rewind some of the slides to help you out.